One aspect of Unitarian Universalism that has attracted a lot of people over the years is our ongoing affirmation of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In the UU Association's original 1961 principles, this was expressed as a commitment to affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality and the dignity of man. Yes, the 1961 principles had some problematic language, which is why they were updated in the 1980s. In the UUA's new values adopted this year, this is expressed in what shall ever be known as the Wheeler Amendment, because it was proposed by our own UUFP president, Beck Wheeler. As part of the equity value, we now declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. To me, all of this language is a direct legacy of the Universalist part of our heritage. Universalism originally meant a belief in universal salvation, that all souls would ultimately go to heaven. Over time, it evolved into an affirmation of the possibility of salvation in this life, that the kingdom of heaven here on earth, otherwise known as the beloved community, is achievable. It also stands in clear contrast to any religious system that condemns humans as inherently sinful, that denies us any agency in our own destiny, that rejects any effort to redeem humanity and the earth. For many people coming to us from such a religious background, our UU message of inherent worth and dignity is profoundly liberating. Now, as I've said in a previous sermon on how we apply this to people who do horrible things, our talk of worthiness and the right to flourish isn't really a matter of belief. The 1961 principles, the 1985 principles, the 2024 values, they are all part of a covenant, not a creed. So inherent worth and dignity isn't a claim about reality. And we don't have to do mental gymnastics to figure out how murderers and torturers and authoritarians can have inherent worth. Rather, as part of our covenant, it's about our commitment to treat other people with respect, dignity, love, and compassion. Not because they've done anything to deserve it, but because it's part of who we are, part of who we want to be. I think this is why there are some therapists and counselors in our area who, so I've been told, refer some of their clients to us on the basis that when we truly live our declaration of inherent worth and dignity, we can offer a safe place for people who have been hurt by other religious systems, particularly those who have suffered religious trauma. We may not be able to do much to help them heal, but we can welcome them and we can love them while they heal. This morning, then, I'm going to talk about what I learned from a course on religious trauma that I took during my sabbatical earlier this year, and we'll reflect on what it means for us as a congregation. During my sabbatical, I had a number of colleagues, both Unitarian Universalist and Christian, express surprise at all that I was doing, from justice work to continuing education. Each time I would remind them that I was on sabbatical from the UUFP, but I wasn't on sabbatical from being myself. So I took the advantage of my time away from this pulpit to read and study and explore and learn, given that I had a lot more time to do that. And part of doing that during my sabbatical was to take a course on religious trauma, what it is, what causes it, and how it can be treated. Now, if you've attended one of our Pathway to Membership orientations, which is one way to become a UUFP member, you may remember that we have a time when participants share their own spiritual journeys, from their religious upbringing, if they had one, to how they ended up coming here. One common story I've heard in most of the probably 30-something orientations I've co-led is that is that of someone who was part of a church but asked too many questions. Some of those people were treated kindly, and it was suggested to them that they might find a religious home in a more liberal faith, often the UU church down the road. Some were treated less kindly, and they were told or made to leave. From the way most people tell their story, that wasn't such a big deal. For the rest, it was more of a painful chapter of their life, but they've since come to terms with it. For a few people, though, they are still suffering from what happened because, quite possibly, they experienced religious trauma. Now, fair warning, I'm going to be talking about trauma, and I'll give some examples of traumatizing events. But I don't want to re-traumatize anybody. So please take care of yourself if you find yourself getting triggered. Here's the definition of religious trauma that we used in the course I took. Religious trauma results from an event, series of events, relationships, or circumstances within or connected to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. That's a pretty broad definition because it covers a lot of ground as to how someone can be traumatized within a religious context. So let me clarify a couple of things. First, psychological trauma is a severe mental injury that breaks someone's ability to hold three fundamental assumptions: that the world is generally safe, that existence is generally meaningful, and that they are worthy. This is much more than day-to-day stress, or not getting one's way, or losing an argument, or having hurt feelings. Trauma is a result of some sort of violence that makes someone feel threatened, muddled, and worthless. Second, it's often said that trauma lives in the body. What this means is that we don't merely remember the traumatic event as if it were any other ordinary event, and then we can think about it and talk about it and analyze it rationally. Conventional talk therapy may help someone feel better for a while, but it doesn't actually help to deal with someone's trauma because it's not in the rational part of their brain. Rather, trauma is deep-seated in the parts of our brain involved in emotion, such as the amygdala, which plays a big role in emotional responses, including fear and anger. Trauma is remembered as sensory fragments, not a coherent story. And they can be triggered by what would otherwise be an ordinary sight, sound, or smell, but which the trauma memory says is dangerous. The threat response kicks in, suppressing the brain's ability to reason and use language, and falling back on a response of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. You've heard of fight becoming aggressive, flight running away, and freeze being unable to move. Fawn is a fourth response that is trying to please someone to make the threat go away. So a simpler definition of religious trauma is that it's trauma that happens in a religious context. In the course I took, I heard lots of examples of this, from trauma that occurs in a place of worship or a family home, to trauma that is inherited as part of the legacy of slavery and the accompanying religious abuse here in the United States. Such trauma most often occurs in extremist religious settings, with documented cases in every major world religion. And the reasons are all those you'd expect and more. Suppression of women's agency, particularly their sexuality. Homophobia, transphobia, and so-called conversion therapy. ostracism of people who don't believe the right things or live the right way, corporal punishment of children, sexual abuse of children and women, telling people that their accident or sickness or miscarriage happened because they weren't faithful enough, teaching people, particularly children, about hell. I think I was most taken aback by the stories of people with anxiety or depression who were forbidden by their religious leaders from taking prescribed medications because they had to trust God. And taking medication, they were told, is how evil gets in. In terms of treating trauma, again, conventional talk therapy doesn't help much. The rational part of the brain has limited ability to change anything that the deeper parts of the brain, when the deeper parts of the brain are running the show. This has been a challenge to Western medicine, with its emphasis on reason and dispassionate objectivity, as if there were such a thing anyway. There are two types of treatment, though, that have been found to work. First, there are somatic therapies. In other words, working trauma out through the body. It's been observed, for instance, that non-human mammals and people in some non-Western cultures will have a bodily response to a traumatic event, trembling, shaking, or even convulsing as a way of preventing trauma from hijacking the brain. I would also include in this category what's known as eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, which seems to help people process emotional distress by mimicking what happens during the rapid eye movement, or REM, phase of sleep. Second, psychoactive drugs known as entheogens, both those used by some indigenous cultures and others produced by modern chemistry, have helped a number of people to process their trauma. Obviously, these need to be administered and supervised by somebody who has been trained and really knows what they're doing. But that goes for somatic therapies too. So what does this mean for a congregation like ours, where, so far as I know, we do not have anybody, including me, trained in treating trauma, nor are we otherwise equipped to offer trauma therapy? Even one of our most therapeutic programs, namely fellowship circles, is, even if it is definitely not therapy, still akin to talk therapy anyway. The first thing for us to understand is that we have people here who have suffered from religious trauma. According to one study, at least 1/3 of adults in the US have experienced religious trauma at some point in their life. That's at least 1/3 of the population. Some of them, whether in the course of their own theological deconstruction or upon the recommendation of a therapist, will find their way to us. The second thing for us to understand is that even though we don't hold to any of the beliefs or practices of extremist religions, someone suffering from religious trauma can still be triggered by something that otherwise might seem innocuous. If someone responds way out of proportion to what has happened, they're probably acting out of trauma. Responding rationally to their response won't help because their response wasn't rational. Rather, we have to respond emotionally, primarily with compassion. The third thing for us to understand is that we can still contribute to someone's religious trauma. If someone experiences us as failing to live the values we claim, either in a single severe instance or repeatedly over time, that can be traumatizing because it undermines one or more of the three fundamental assumptions we need to live rationally: that the world is generally safe, that existence is generally meaningful, and that they are worthy. The fourth thing for us to understand is that our message of inherent worth and dignity and our commitment to treat people with respect, love, and compassion are really, really important. We may not be able to do much to directly help someone heal from religious trauma, but we can offer a safe place for them while they are working through it. We can support them as they rebuild their own sense of worth. We can show that there is meaning to be found in life, and we can love them. I invite you now into a short time of meditation. You'll want to find a comfortable position where you are, so your arms and legs can rest freely and your body can relax. You may close your eyes if you wish and breathe in and out. I invite you to meditate on this reading called My Commitments to Myself by the Reverend Laura Mancuso. I take care of myself first because I am deserving of exquisite care. I take care of myself to maintain my capacity to help others. I move and stretch my body every day. I spend time in nature, attuning my senses to the earth's wisdom. I ration my daily exposure to the news. I identify and access credible sources of information. I protect myself from becoming overwhelmed. I pace myself. I sit with the reality of uncertainty and impermanence and allow it to temper my desire for control. I listen without judgment to others' reactions, which may be different from mine. I forgive myself and others when stress brings out our shadow selves. I feel fear fully when I am fearful. I experience sadness fully when I am sad. I allow anger fully when I am angry. I relish joy fully when I am joyful. I seek out healthy pleasures and indulge in them without guilt. I remind myself that feelings are transient states that move through me. They do not last, and they do not define me, nor do my thoughts. I balance my drive for self-improvement with compassionate acceptance of myself as I am right now. I initiate contact with loved ones to let them know I hold them in my heart. I seek out, with increased sensitivity, those who are the most vulnerable. If possible, I share my resources with those who need help to survive. When possible, I move away from people, situations, and experiences that do not serve my highest good. I strengthen my connection to my sources of spiritual strength so that I continue to be replenished. I acknowledge the nearness of death as a key motivator for living a full life. I pray for the suffering of all beings to cease. I grieve my losses and celebrate my successes. I remain open to new ways of being, surprising sources of joy, and unanticipated discoveries every day. As part of training to be clergy, many faith traditions require, or at least recommend, that there would be ministers, rabbis, and imams enroll in what is called clinical pastoral education, or CPE. This is usually 400 hours as a hospital chaplain visiting patients during a daily routine, or responding to calls outside of regular hours. The CPE student may have received some spiritual care training, but the hospital itself provides little instruction beyond go see patients. I believe that the purpose of CPE is to make sure that clergy people truly understand how powerless we are when it comes to helping someone who is suffering, much less to heal them of the cause of their suffering. Trying to treat them in some way would not only be a violation of professional ethics, it would likely harm the person we want to help too. All we can do is be with them in their suffering. Perhaps listen to them if they want to talk about it. As the Reverend Gordon McKeeman put it as part of his longer reflection on the nature of this work, ministry is being present with, to, and for others in their terrors and torments, in their grief, misery, and pain. Ministry is knowing that those feelings are our feelings too. This month's Soul Matters theme is the practice of presence. That's in the sense of being present with, to, and for others. Though it's probably no accident that this is also the month when a lot of people are giving presents to one another. Then again, our presence is really the best gift we can give to another person. After all, our presence is the most powerful way we can affirm someone's inherent worth and dignity. Not by giving them advice, not by telling them what to do, and certainly not telling them how they should feel, not by trying to fix them or solve their problems, but by simply being with them. It says much more loudly than words ever can that they are worth being with, that they deserve to be treated with dignity, love, and compassion, and that in the present moment, they are the most important person. We'll be returning to this theme a number of times this month, particularly on December 15th, when UUFP member Terry Williams is preaching on the joy of presence. And you can take presence either way there. As you may know, the Reverend Dr. Terry Williams is a retired Disciples of Christ minister, previously serving at Hilton Christian Church. And I mention this because she will form the core of a new UUFP spiritual care team that we are going to build together. Terry and I will develop a covenant, and she'll work with me to visit members and friends of the congregation and provide that ministry of presence based in our declaration that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. You'll hear more details in due course, but for now I'll close with the words of someone who ministered to so many of us growing up, the Reverend Fred Rogers. Imagine if we all walked into the world with the belief that each person was inherently worthy. Imagine if our goal was to help each other recognize that we are worthy of being loved. May it be so.